I wanted to talk about having power over powerlessness. And I thought I'd start with a story. And the story goes that there was a science experiment where they got a bunch of fleas and put them in a jar. And then they closed the lid and left it for 3 days. And after 3 days, they opened the lid and the fleas never again jumped higher than the lid. And even after those fleas reproduced, their offspring, seeing the behavior of the parents, they too never jumped higher than the lid. I don't think that's a real scientific experiment, by the way, because I couldn't find any evidence of it. No, I don't think it is. That video, the really famous video, I think is actually a PlayStation ad if you finish the video. But anyway, it gets the point across, right? And the point is that sometimes we can limit ourselves by our own beliefs. What we actually believe and our thoughts are, they're actually like very powerful things. The saying that your attitude determines your altitude is like a little cliche, but it's so true. So I guess the question is like, have we placed a lid over our own jar? Or is the lid that others placed on us limiting us? In that sense, powerlessness is an illusion, right? We really need to examine whether those limits are actually true. And it's worth examining because it can stop us from fulfilling our fullest potential. It can stop you from doing all the good things that you can and want to do and stop you from living a life full of purpose and contentment. So I remember like a few years ago when I was still really struggling with my mental health and going through counseling, the topic of my goals came up in the first couple of sessions, and my counselor asked me what I wanted to achieve through the sessions and what my ideal life would look like. And it was good to set that expectation, right? Because the sessions aren't cheap. So it's like, if we don't even know what the goal is, it's a huge waste of money. Right? It's like $150 an hour. And I thought about it for a long time, and I strained really hard, thinking like, what do I want? And I was trying to think of like the best life I could imagine. And after a really long time, the best I could come up was like, I just wanted to live. You know, I just wanted to go through life feeling okay about myself. It would be great if I could just stop wanting to end it all every day, and I just didn't want to hate myself anymore. And that was really the best life I could imagine. But then my counselor asked me a question, and like, it really blew me away. One of the biggest like mic drop moments I remember in my 3 years of counseling. Like after I said that, he just asked, he was like, huh. And he kind of just looked at me, and then he asked me, isn't that the bare minimum? And like my mind was really blown. I thought for so long, and all I could, like the best life I could come up was that. And he was like, that's the bare minimum. And I went away like, he's right. That really is the bare minimum. And then it kind of hit me how low of a standard I had for life. You know, it may seem obvious now, or maybe you have the same lid on your life as I did, but that's why we all kind of need to examine our limitations. Are they realistic? Do they agree with the truth? What is God's perspective? And that's where the powerlessness comes in, because if you believe those limitations, it renders you powerless. What can you do, really, right? I can gladly say my standards have lifted since then. Thanks to counseling, the things we've learned here at House Church and the Living Wisdom course. And now my goal is to enter heaven, having lived life to the fullest, making the most out of every opportunity that comes my way, serving and encouraging others to the most of my ability. You know, I want to hear God say, when I enter heaven, I want to hear God say, welcome home, well done, good and faithful servant. Instead of, it's really good to see you, and I'm glad you're here, but you could have done so much more. I had prepared so many good works for you to do, but you never took the step to start. And I hope no one wants to be in that situation, right? Because like you're saved, yeah, but you could have done so much more. And so tonight it's like, I really, my hope is that we'll encourage each other and examine the boundaries and limitations we have or others have set on us. Because it's a terrible feeling powerless. If you are at the mercy of life or at the mercy of another person or of a situation and there's nothing you can do about it, it can really destroy your mental and emotional health. But it doesn't have to be that way. Maybe we could examine some common ways that we are rendered powerless and see what lie underneath those beliefs and are they really true or not. So a really common one, the first one, is the inability to say no. Like it's quite common, especially in the Asian culture, where like people feel powerless to refuse, to just say no. And you end up saying yes when you don't want to. And what can happen is, if you struggle with this, is like, well, you can end up in situations you don't want to be in. You can be stuck doing things you don't actually want to do. And the thing with that is like, eventually you will get resentful. and maybe have angry outbursts when, like, you've shoved things down too far, and then one little thing sets you off, but then the others around you don't even know why you're upset, because like you've agreed to do these things the whole time, right? So in other people's eyes, you've just like blown up for no reason. But what are some things that could be rendering us powerless in this area? Number one, people pleasing. You might believe I have to say yes or they will get upset, and then making others upset feels horrible. It may be your unbearable feeling, like it was mine for ages. And so saying yes can feel like you're avoiding conflict and keeping peace. But we cannot be responsible for other people's feelings, right? Everyone chooses how they react to things. So everyone is responsible for their own reactions. Especially if the cost of someone else's happiness is your misery, then that's not fair. And that's not what God calls us to do either. And like as David Dell always says, peace at any price will just keep costing you more and more. The second reason might be misinterpreted faith. And I struggle with this for a long time too. So God tells us to love and serve others, to deny ourselves and take up our cross and follow him. And I used to think that meant like, oh, I have to just like, keep helping people and do whatever they ask me to do. But that just opens the door up to be exploited, right? Those verses do not mean that you have to bend to every whim, to every beck and call of others. That's not what that means. In fact, in this example, if we take the example of saying no when you're supposed to, denying yourself would mean denying your temptation to say yes when you should say no. And then say no, and then cop the unbearable feeling it brings, but give it to God. And follow Jesus, who is the way, the truth, and the life, and do it even if it feels uncomfortable. Right? That's like denying yourself and taking up your cross and following God. It doesn't mean like you're not important, treat everyone else like they're more important than you. That's not what it means, right? But if we don't like interpret this in a healthy and accurate way, that's what it can set us up to believe. And then what will happen is like, oh, I have to do all these things, like the religious things, but then you're miserable. And we've seen a lot of people who get discontented with the church because of it, right? So whether it's some form of people-pleasing or misinterpreted faith or something else, right? There's many causes. On the surface, it might seem like we're being nice by not saying no to people, by trying to make others happy. But the truth is, like, that's not nice. It's not even genuine. So you're actually being extremely deceptive and lying all the time. But it's like a double portion, because you're being dishonest with the other person, but you're also being dishonest with yourself. Like when they ask you something and you want to say no, but you say yes, you've lied twice. Do we really want to be deceptive liars? But that's what you are if you keep saying yes when you really want to say no. Even at the root of it all, it's worth asking if you really find it hard to say no because you don't want to let others down, because you don't want to hurt them, or if you just want to avoid how it makes you feel. So those two are very different things. So at the end of the day, is it more about escapism rather than actual care for others? And I'll be honest, it was a later case for me for a long time when I found it hard to say no. And I loudly declare I lied all the time, saying yes when I wanted to say no. But there's also a flip side to that. Like some of us may struggle with saying no, and then the other side is some of us might struggle with accepting no. It's like the flip side of the same coin, right? Some people can't say no, others can't take no for an answer. And what does that look like? It could come out as bossiness, aggression. You can drag your friends and family kicking and screaming to do what you want to do, regardless of whether they want it or not. And it can really ruin relationships in the long run. And this is a really paradoxical one, because it seems like the person who does this, who forces their will on others, has power over others. But they really don't. They don't even have control over their own inability to take no for an answer. So they're actually slaves to their need for control. And often control freaks they're control freaks because they constantly feel powerless. And control is their way of dealing with that feeling. What kind of underlying beliefs could be present for a person like this? They may equate control with predictability and therefore safety. And so when they cannot control things, it actually feels dangerous. They might fear vulnerability or have a struggle with having boundaries. And they might put on responsibility as a mask on, but the true underlying face is pride, thinking their way is better than everyone else's. They can tie their identity and their worth with outcomes. And that's why they take refusals personally, thinking people don't support them if they say no. But then the truth to this point, the truth is that we're really not in control of much in our lives, right? Barely anything, really. And that is a fact we need to make friends with. But the good news is that God is in control of everything. He is sovereign. Nothing is outside his control. Will you let go of your perceived imaginary control and enter under God's sovereignty? And because the truth is that God's will always happens, right? And if the thought of it giving up control makes you uncomfortable, it's really worth examining why. And there's a great quote from Edith Eger, which Jesse found for me. But she's a Holocaust survivor and a clinical psychologist. And she said, to be passive is to let others decide for you. And to be aggressive is to decide for others. And to be assertive is to decide for yourself. And so like everything that Stan and Helen have taught us about assertiveness, about negotiation skills, it all like helps with all of this stuff. It's unhelpful if we just like listen to these talks on their own. They all feed into each other. The third form of potential powerlessness I wanted to talk about is learned helplessness. And this is kind of like the flea jar example, right? It can kind of show up in the following ways. Again, not exhaustive, but number one, low motivation. You know, you kind of say like, why bother? Nothing ever changes. Or it can be like passive behavior, always waiting for someone else to fix the problem. And this one can really mess with our walk with God and our expectations of God. Because if we are always used to always being passive and waiting for others to fix the problem, we can put that expectation on God too, right? This kind of, it can look like the overly spiritual person who always just like tries to pray things away. They pray all the time, pray a lot, but they never actually do anything. You know, they pray and wait for God to fix their problems. And praying is good, of course, and sometimes God does intervene and help us. So I've experienced this personally, because my dad used to have a bit of a gambling problem when I was younger. I'm talking like maybe when I was like 6 or 7 years old. And it was the cause of many arguments between my parents, because we really didn't have the money for him to play with at that time. And I remember one night they had a huge fight over it because my dad wanted to go to the casino again. And after heaps of yelling, my dad left through the back door. My mum was like really pissed, like just following him the whole way and yelling at him. And then as soon as he left the back door, she slammed it as hard as she could and shattered all the glass on the door. And then I just remember her crying and she started to pray because at this time she'd just become a Christian. And about 20 minutes later, my dad came home, like way too early to have had a casino run. And my mum asked him, like, why are you home? Why'd you come back? And he said, I don't know why, I just don't feel like going anymore. And yeah, and he has not set foot in a casino since then. And it's been like 20-something years, so he quit cold turkey.
Praise the Lord.
Praise the Lord. We all know how addicting that behavior can be, right? Yeah. But he quit cold turkey. So I deeply know and believe God helps us in our time of need. But if the problem is something that we are supposed to take ownership of, then God isn't going to do it for us. If he just did everything for you, you wouldn't grow. It's kind of like signing up to the gym to lift weights, but when you get there, you're like, God, lift it for me. You know, you're not going to get stronger, right? And he loves us too much to spoil us into underdeveloped, kind of like adult children, having, you know, being an adult in form, but actually in substance, we're still children who essentially cannot do anything for ourselves. He's not an over-rescuer. So like if you pray to grow in patience, don't be surprised if he sends a bunch of people you need to be patient with in your direction, right? Or if you find yourself in situations where you can do nothing but wait. If you pray to grow in faith, then don't be surprised when the trials come, because the Bible tells us, Romans 5, 3-5, not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance produces character, and character hope. So don't be surprised when those things come. And then the flip side of the passive person is the over-rescuer, the person who over-functions. They can't stop themselves from rescuing other people. You see someone who needs help and you just can't hold yourself back from helping them. But there's actually a fine line between helping someone who actually needs help and rescuing someone who should be helping themselves. And of course, as Christians, we're called to help those who need it, but over-functioning is not helping. You have to realize, like, if you're this kind of person, that you are actually harming the person when you do that. Every time you rescue someone who should be helping themselves, you are actually robbing them of a chance to grow. You are being unhelpful, and you're actually being a stumbling block, not a helper. Remember that the next time you feel the urge to help. You know, we pray to God for the fruit of the Spirit, and one aspect of that is self-control. And if you struggle with any of these things, pray to God for help, to give you self-control. Control your urge to hand out your help. And then after thinking about that and realizing that actually it's unhelpful to help someone who should be helping themselves, you still feel the desire to do so, then there's the really serious question you need to ask yourself: do you really want to help them? Or just appease the unbearable feeling that you're feeling? If you really wanted to help someone, you'd want the best for them, right? But then the best for them could mean that they need to grow, even if it means a little bit of like short-term pain for long-term gain. And they need to, in the moment, suffer the consequences of their decisions for a while. So it's actually selfish to put your need to not feel bad above someone else's need to grow. I know this is a hard pill to swallow because I had to swallow it as well, because I was a rescuer for a long time. And it really was all about me, because I didn't want to feel bad seeing someone else in whatever predicament. It usually played out with my parents. Won't go into it. I think I've talked about it before. And you can kind of ask yourself, is it kind to give an alcoholic alcohol just because they're having a meltdown? Or are you actually slowly killing them? Because when we overfunction, essentially that's kind of what we're doing. And the fourth form of powerlessness, negative talk. Jesse's done that. What was you, Jess? Yeah, done a good talk about this before. When we say things like, oh, I'm just not good at this, or I'll always fail. Or it could be negative labeling from other people, where someone else tells you, oh, you're a failure, or you'll never be anything. Again, this is like the flea in the jar story. The good news with this one is like it's the easiest one to deal with. But then the bad news is it's the hardest one to deal with. It kind of just depends what you believe. Because if you believe you'll always fail, you're probably right. And if you don't believe you'll always fail, you're probably right. To use, something Stan said in our discussion group the other week. These things are all what we call labels, right? Like I'm this, I'm that, or you're this, you're that, you're too dumb, you're smart, blah, blah, blah. But did you know that no one actually has a right to label you? Not even yourself. And Jessica Adele taught us this at the Living Wisdom Night School, because we didn't know the difference. And we asked her, and she said, people cannot label you, but they can describe you. So what's the difference? A description would be something like this. If someone said, oh, Jerry doesn't have many skills and qualifications right now, that's probably a pretty accurate statement of my current situation. But if they said, Jerry is useless and always will be, that's a label. And the reason no one has a right to label us is simple. You don't know what God can do with someone, right? He can do anything with anyone. So we can describe people, but to label them is kind of like to put like a final sticker on them, right? And actually, you don't even have the right to do that to yourself. So recently I've been struggling a little bit with feeling useless. It just seems like for the last while, everything I've done has been like really hard and just not working like what I'm used to, like at least worked a little bit. It just feels like everything's breaking. Nothing's going to plan. Random bad things keep happening. Like someone hit our car. And we don't even know who did it because it was parked overnight, and then next morning there's a huge dent. Nothing's efficient like how I like. And in almost every aspect, I've been feeling a little bit discouraged. But one thing that I have been growing in this period is my relationship with God. And I had been taking my frustrations to God. I prayed to God really honestly and directly. And I said to God, like, I feel so useless. Why is everything so hard? I wish I had the opportunity. I started thinking back on my life and I was like, I wish I had the opportunity to do better in school, to have better mental health. Maybe then I wouldn't be in this rut. I started being, kind of like, oh, why not this, why not that? And I don't know why, but the image of like a really tattered and broken chisel came up in my head. It's really random, right? But that's exactly what I felt like. A really broken chisel. Imagine like cracks everywhere. It's blunt. There's rust everywhere. And the handle is loose. And it's chipped and it's just horrible, right? And I said to God, I was like, yeah, that's exactly right. That's what I feel like. I feel so useless. But then I felt in my spirit, God say to me, so what? He said, is a master sculptor limited by the tool in his hand? And he said, you are in my hands and I can do anything with you. I can create masterpieces beyond your wildest imagination, even with the most broken tools. And I was so encouraged by it because it's true, right? When you see a really beautiful sculpture, you don't think like, damn, that's a good chisel, right? You think like, wow, Michelangelo is really good at this, right?
That's true.
And the same applies for all of us. God can cover all our mistakes, all the tragedies that have happened to us, everything, and use them for good. No matter how tattered you think you are, he can use you. The question is kind of, do you believe that? Will you allow him to use you? Will you loan him, your life and your experience for his purpose? And we actually see that over and over again in the Bible, right? Whether it's Moses who murdered someone and ran away, or Joseph who was in prison and sold by his brothers. God always used them for great things, right? But the Bible tells us in 2 Corinthians chapter 10 that we are to take captive every thought and make it obedient to Christ. But what does that mean in plain English? I think it simply means we are to live by the truth, because Jesus Christ is the truth, right? And being obedient to Christ is to live in truth. And that's actually what we have been doing the whole time at House Church. No matter what topic we talk about, whether it's powerlessness or unbearable feelings, words or echoes, negative self-talk, whatever it is, you're actually just holding up what you believe to the light and seeing that, hey, is this actually true? Right? That's all we've been doing. And then if it's not true, then we need to ask, what is the truth? And that's, again, submitting our thoughts to Christ, right? And that's actually how you overcome any misbelief that may be keeping you captive, whatever it is. And that's also what the whole journaling process is about, that Stan and Helen taught us before. Yeah, holding up your beliefs to the truth. Does it fit? Is it consistent? And if it's not, then replace it with the truth. And that's why it's so powerful and effective. I wonder if we're still using it, or have we, forgotten about it. And that decision's in your hands, right? Because say you're sick, even if you have the right medicine, if you don't actually take it, there's no difference between you and the person who doesn't have a cure. And no one can force you to take it, right? That's called abuse of sovereignty that I've talked about before. Even God won't shove it down your throat. So please use it, guys. It's really life-changing stuff. And it's more than just about improving your mental and emotional health. You are literally getting closer to God because you're living by the truth. Because there's actually no difference between God and the truth. God is the truth. Again, Stan said before, God has the monopoly on truth. Everything that's true is of God. And I used to ask God, when I was like really, really struggling, I used to ask him why he didn't just show up in front of me and encourage me, give me a hug or something like that. I felt like it would be so helpful, right? Like just the other day, like at Alpha, we're talking about writing in the sky. And I used to question him, like why not, What harm could it bring? But the truth is, like he taught me later, he's around us all the time. Because the truth is always with you, right? Encouraging you. Only if you believe it. God loves us. That doesn't change whether you're in a good mood or a bad mood. And as you live by the truth, you will feel God with you more and more. And you get stronger and stronger. And you get used to comforting yourself with the truth, and you realize actually all you need is like God's already given you. You don't need the writing in the sky. You don't need him to appear in front of you because he's already there. But if you don't, like you yourself don't believe, what can you do? Those are just like a few examples of perceived powerlessness, I guess. There's obviously no time to go through all of them, but the process to get power over powerlessness is the same. It's just to examine, are they true, right? What is the truth? And so I guess for the discussion question, I'll post them in the chat, I guess. We can discuss. Anyway, any questions? Question.
You mentioned before
that when you went to the counselor, I think the question that gave you was, what goals do you have in life?
Yeah.
And you said you wanted to live life.
Yeah.
So you are alive, but you want to live. What's the difference?
The difference was at the time I wanted to die. So my goal was I just want to not die. And that to me, in my wildest imagination, was the best life I could imagine. So that's when he was like, isn't that the bare minimum? And I was like, oh my gosh, he's right. Yeah.
And can I say that it's not true that you don't have skills? You have a really powerful skill. You're self-deprecating and very funny. And when someone's like that, it invites all sorts of grace.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I accept.
and just your realness and your honesty is like really better than any sermon in the church.
No, I do have skills. I do have skills. Yeah, I do have skills.
Real and raw and
Yeah.
oh, it's so
Yeah.